Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show. Hello and welcome back to Fighting on Film. This week we are going to take a look at our very first Ukrainian war film. And we've decided to do this as it is the 1 year anniversary since Russia's invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. So this week we're going to look at Cyborgs, which is a 2017 film which tells the story of the defenders of the Donetsk Airport, which was a battle that was fought in 2014, end of 2014, beginning of 2015. And it's become sort of a national touchstone for Ukraine, I think. It's kind of like the Alamo or Dunkirk.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting one to cover, and it's one we thought that was fitting to cover at this juncture of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And I think Rob and I have also decided that we're going to do a small donation to United 24, which is a fundraising organization set up by Ukraine, which fundraises for both the military and humanitarian and the rebuilding and that sort of thing in Ukraine. So
yeah,
we would encourage others to do the same, but we're definitely going to do that. I guess without further ado, let's launch into Cyborgs.
I certainly enjoyed it. I always love seeing what different countries other than the UK and America does with their film industries. And how they treat war movies as well.
Totally.
But yeah, maybe Matt, you should do production first, because I think it's probably important to give more of an understanding of the actual events.
So before I begin, probably should caveat that probably our pronunciations of some Ukrainian names is going to be subpar.
Yeah, it can be a bit shocking.
We'll do our absolute very best to get them right, but do forgive us if we get them wrong. Directed by Akhtem Satebliov, who is a Crimean Tatar of Crimean Tatar descent.
Okay.
And he's an actor and director. Interestingly, one of his first major films was a film called K-Tama, which was released in 2013, and that tells the story of Stalin's deportation of the Crimean Tatars, which obviously is an important aspect for the director. And then he did a couple of films, including one about the Vikings, and then I think a sci-fi film. And then in 2020, he did a 6-part TV series called Volunteer about a Ukrainian serviceman dealing with some life post-service after an experience on the Donbas front. There's also a counter-terrorism element to it, where there's separatist terrorist elements and such. Sounds interesting. In 2021, he directed a very stylized game trailer for Warpath Showdown, which was like a mobile video game, but the trailer is
is
like
that
threw
like
a lot of money at it?
The game,
the World War II game.
Yeah, and it's like a top-down game, but they make these really over-the-top adverts. Yeah, I remember seeing something like that a few months back.
It was cool. 2021 that came out, and I remember it looked extremely high-end for a mobile game, but interesting. More interestingly, I think, is the 2 films he's got coming out later this year. The first of which is out next week, in fact, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Is Mirne 21, which is a film about the start of the conflict in 2014, which I feel like is kind of the way Western films do commentary on current wars by making a film about a past war.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like how Kelly's Heroes is an allegory for Vietnam.
Yeah, and MASH
Yeah,
for Vietnam and such.
yeah,
I definitely feel like that might be what's going on there because, of course, the context of this is Ukraine is at war, and
of course.
culturally, they're going to be making these kind of films to explain, how, the position that they're in,
Mm.
and there's going to be a
It's
propaganda
like
element
it's
to it.
films as a tool, isn't it? So what we've done
Exactly.
since film's
Um,
inception.
and then the other film is called Hell is Empty and All the Demons Are Here.
Oh,
Um, and that's described as three stories unfolding on the first day of the Russian invasion in 2022,
oh,
which is a more up to the minute. Sounds like another war movie. But those both sound really interesting. Reportedly, he joined the Territorial Defense Force in February 2022 when Russia invaded, but I'm not sure if he's still active with the TDF. The film was produced by Ivana Diodora, who worked with the director on a previous film, the one about the Stalin's deportation of the Tartars. The film was written by screenwriter Natalia Vorozbit, who is an award-winning playwright and screenwriter, and she's written both Russian and Ukrainian TV stage
hmm.
plays and film. And she's had quite an interesting career. Cinematography was handled by Yuri Korol, who has worked on both of the director's new films, which are coming up, as well as that game trailer and a 2015 film called Battle of Sevastopol, which is about the Second World War battle. The film was made for about $1.8 million, and it was produced by a company called IDAS Film. But at least half of the money was put up by the Ukrainian government. Again, underpinning that propaganda element to this film, which is important to contextualize. But as we'll talk about later on, we don't think it's as overt as it could be with the propaganda side of things.
No, there's nuance there, which I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting. Yeah.
And of course, there was lots of kit and assistance from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. It did well at the box office. I don't think it made back that full budget, but I believe it's considered one of the most successful recent Ukrainian films. And it was released as a four-part mini-series on TV in 2019 as well. So it had a bit of a TV run, split it up into a couple of shows. It was filmed on a number of locations. I'm just gearing up to pronounce this correctly.
Poor Matt. This week
I
he drew the
know.
short straw with the production because we alternate.
So one of the locations it was filmed at was the Honcharivsky, I think that's pronounced correctly.
Okay.
Combined Arms Ground, which is like a training area for the Ukrainian military. And those tank sequences were filmed there. And then some of the external airport sequences were filmed at Stovitska, I think it is pronounced. Would you say that's how it's pronounced, Rob? You've
Sounds
seen
right
the
to
name.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Stovitska Airport, and that stood in for Donetsk Airport, basically. And I think it's relatively well shot,
Oh
considering. And
yeah.
I think a lot of the external and internal sequences look pretty good.
Yeah, it's very claustrophobic. It looks smashed by small arms and tank rounds and things and artillery. Like, because if you see, there's lots of footage on YouTube of the actual battle from inside with the Ukrainian defenders and the separatists filming their own footage. It does look very similar. I think they might have CGI'd in the tower.
Yeah.
Good looking film.
Yeah. And then finally, they had a number of consultants on the film, including people that had actually been involved in the defense of the airport, the so-called cyborgs. So
Yes.
the title might seem a bit weird to us as Western audience, but the title comes from the Ukrainians overheard some Russian transmissions that described the defenders as cyborgs, sort of like inhuman defenders that
Like
were,
robotic, like Terminator types,
yeah,
I
they couldn't
guess.
be tired, and
Yeah.
so that's where the name of the film comes from, obviously.
Right.
And a number of the defenders are listed as helping with the production, which I think is interesting, and that's possibly added to some of the realism.
without a doubt. I've quickly got a few one-word reviews for this week. I didn't get a retro review because the film's quite new. I always think of the films like past 2010. I always think let's not do a retro review because it's more modern. Do you know what I mean? It makes sense.
Yeah, there's probably some good Ukrainian reviews out there. I know it won awards.
Yeah, it did. It did well.
It won, I think, the equivalent to kind of like BAFTAs.
Oh, okay.
And that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm impressed that we had some
I know.
one-word
So
reviews.
I put out the call. We had a few. So Peter, aka Spez Baby, says timely. Paul Hicks said bougie. Zemachar said very good movie. Martin Collins went with unseen, which was very brave because not a lot of people have seen this. I don't think outside of Ukraine. G at midnight course says sluther. I think that's a good way of ending that. So for the cast, and I'm going to do my best with the pronunciations, just like Matt did. The edit will make
You've got to do better than I have.
The edit's going to make. Well, I've played a lot of Football Manager, and I've signed a lot of Eastern European centre backs, so I'm geared up. Did an Eastbourne save. I had a Czechoslovakian centre back who stayed with me for like 15 years, and he was an absolute legend. And I can't remember his name because it was so many years ago. Up the sports, that's what I'm saying. For the Eastbourne Borough fans out there, only on Fighting on Film could you get a Ukrainian war film where I mentioned
niche Football Manager reference. Wow,
amazing. So into the cast, we have. I'm going to run through the actors and their code name that they give themselves in the film. Then I'll go into their credits. So we have Andriy Isnyenko, who is Saturday, Roman Yazinovsky as guide, Vladislav Dovzhenko as August, Makar Tikhomarov as Major, Viktor Zyadanov as Old, Alexander Piskunov as Mars, Konstantin Temyak as Psycho, Roman Semisal plays Redoubt, who was Alexander Trepak. I think he was an actual actual commander on the day at the time. And Alexander Roderini plays a journalist in a small cameo role. So Izyenko, he's in a Ukrainian series called, I'm going to butcher this one, Zlomvo Chanya, just like a crime series. And he plays Peter in a 2019 film called The Rising Hawk, which also stars Robert Patrick and Tommy Flanagan, who was Chibs in Sons of Anarchy, if you remember that one.
Is that the Viking film?
No, it's not. It's actually about the Mongolian conquest of Eastern Europe.
Oh yes, I saw that one too. Yeah. That's right.
And that looked all right. That looked quite fun. And then we have Makar Tikhomarov, who played. Matt's laughing at me every time I say these names. Tikhomarov, who played Major.
I know the difficulty. That's all.
I know. He played Mikula in The Secrets, a Ukrainian drama series. And he played Luka in a film called The Line about smugglers on the Ukrainian border. A lot of these actors, they are just mainly based in Ukraine. Then we have Yasinovsky, appears in a 2022 film called Sniper, the White Raven, which just came out at the end of last year. And that's another film set in the Donbas, but it's really an allegory for like the war that's going on now, as Matt said. Mm-hmm. And that film seemed a lot more made in the style of like a Western type action film. A lot more action heavy than this, or the trailer would make it seem so. This film seemed more about stoicism and nationalism, rather than that film just seemed to be more of an action type, like sort of patriotic flag waver, perhaps. Yeah. I do want to see it because it looked interesting. And then he in a film called Klim, which deals with the Donbas War as well, and he's also in 2019's Battle of Krutki as another Ukrainian war film set in 1918. Dozhenko, or Dovchenko, he's in 2022's Obim, which is a film about two families dealing with their men going off to war. I think that might be in the Donbas, but because it's set in 2022, I couldn't. It might be about the war that's going on now, but I couldn't find out. There's just not a lot about it online. And then he played the famous Ukrainian poet Ivan Franko's son, Petro, in a series about his life in 2019. And Ivan Petro actually was one of the founders of the Ukrainian Air Force, which I thought was quite interesting, finding that out today.
Interesting,
yeah. Zadov, he was in 2021's God Will Forgive, which is a short film where he plays a chaplain trying to flee the Donbas in 2014. And he also appeared as Uncle Horan with Azienko in the Rising Hawk film, which I mentioned with the Robert Patrick one. Piskunov, a small role in Death of Stalin in 2017. He played a snitch, or a character called the Snitch in it. I don't remember what that would have been in the movie. It's been a while since I've seen it. He's the only actor in this that has a Western credit, I think. And then he was also appeared in the Battle of Krutki as well, and The Line. Temniak appeared in a series called Inseparable, which is a Ukrainian 2013 miniseries about Chernobyl, which it looked a lot like the HBO series. So I wonder if it was an imitator or it was a predecessor, really, wouldn't it? Because
so it might have been an influence.
Yeah, it might have influenced. It did look very influence heavy, actually. And then Semisal was in Sniper the White Raven, and he was also in U211 Cherkasy about the Ukrainian minesweeper.
Oh yeah, that looks like a good film.
Refused to give up. Yeah, that looked decent. So yeah, they're all Ukrainian actors. Been on a lot of Ukrainian TV and films, and it's a shame because when you look up their IMDb's, not a lot of these actors have worked for a year to 2 years because of the war, and it is a shame. And I couldn't find anything about any of the chaps, if they'd served in volunteer battalions or if they'd managed to get out or if they're still in Ukraine. But, we hope that they're all in good health. We wish them well, and everyone who's involved in the film. So maybe on to the alley tally.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
I wanted to start this alley tally this week by mentioning that Matt's been doing sterling work on his YouTube channel, The Armourer's Bench, by documenting weaponry and equipment that's being sent over to Ukraine at a rapid pace. I mean, it seems like he's never not researching, contacting people. He's doing really important work. So who better this week to have with us to cover stuff that's in this film? So Matt, what jumped out to you?
No, thanks, Rob.
That's all right, mate.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting 12 months to try and document an ongoing conflict before it becomes history, I suppose. That's one of the main reasons I've been studying all of the intricacies of what's been going on in terms of the weapons in use. But yeah, the film's quite representative, actually. It's quite good. In terms of the small arms, everyone's pretty much armed with AK-74s. Fixed stock, or there's some underfolders in there as well. But one that did stand out to me was, I think is it Guide, the NCO?
Yes, Guide. Yeah.
He has an AK which is fitted with a lot of Fab Defense accessories. So it's got a little collapsing stock, it's got a rail forend, and he has a front grip. And they're all accessories that can be bought from Fab Defense, who are a reasonably affordable manufacturer of firearms accessories. And in around 2015-16, the Ukrainian army actually went on to buy a kit which they called the AKTK, which added like a new flash hider, a new forend, with some rails that allowed you to mount an optic and that sort of thing, just to modernize their AK-74s. But he's the only guy in the film with a slightly modified rifle, which
he is.
I think adds to his character to suggest that he's experienced and he knows what will give him an edge. And the rest of his characterization lends to that as well.
Well, he does that thing where he never actually uses the foregrip. He's holding the mag, like at the very top. Have you noticed that? That's a new trope, I think.
Kind of. Other than that, there's a couple of interesting things. There's an RPG-22, which is kind of the Soviet Russian version of the 66mm M72 Law that we all have seen in plenty of Western films. There's PK general purpose machine guns. They're the belt-fed machine guns in the film. And then there's in the main fight sequence inside the terminal, one of the guys draws what I think is a Stechkin APS, which is an automatic pistol, but he only fires it in semi-automatic, which is probably wise. And there's a couple of nice sequences in there where he uses that. In terms of vehicles, it's BMPs and T-72s. There's quite a good little tank sequence.
Yeah, it's decent, isn't it? Yeah.
Which it was a nice surprise, to be honest.
It's CGI, but they do it at distance, so you don't really notice. It's well done. Yeah.
It is. And then the only other thing that actually really stood out was the Sporterized Mosin Nagant, one of the Separatists.
Oh yeah, you get a fleeting glimpse of it, don't you?
Yeah. You don't get a good look at it, but it's definitely, I think it's definitely a Mosin Nagant. It's not an SVD or anything like that.
I wanted to ask you, the chap that gets out of the car when when the guy's trapped in that crater, does he have an SKS? He has like some sort of like battle rifle. And I couldn't quite ID it.
It's kind of an oblique angle and it's difficult to see. I wonder whether that was an SVD.
Well, it might have been. Yeah,
it could have been an SVT or SKS or something like that. Because it's surprising what does pop up in Ukraine. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of Mosin Nagant still being used.
Yeah,
even now.
Remember at the start of the war, everyone was going, "Look at Maxim, look at DP-28," and it's like, yeah, Second World War firearms still exist. They don't just disintegrate. They don't turn to dust.
Hundreds of thousands in Ukraine.
It's incredible. I really like the multitude of like camo and kit involved. So, guides wearing a Flecktarn German Parker, and I think it's funny that he's not
patch still.
Yeah, he's not taking off the little German flag that comes on them. I have got one in my kit somewhere.
So have I.
I think everyone's got one.
Everyone's got one of those like 90s German Flecktarn 70s,
80s Parkers. Yeah. And he looks great in it. Like they've done enough with the kit to make everyone stand out, because obviously it's going to a thing that's come up again with this war, that there's no real sort of proper one look of a trooper, an infantryman at the moment out there, it would seem. So you've got MTP, the current the camo of the British Army wear, but it's not just the British Army that wear that. Loads of armies wear that in the world.
Yes.
It's and there's DPM, British DPM on show in this movie. And the thing that
some Dutch stuff, maybe
Dutch, Danish DPM.
Yeah, there's some fairly obscure ones that pop up. I think Serpa has an interesting, like, almost like fleece, like a lined fleece. That.
But I've seen pictures of guys that are up at Bakhmut at the moment that are wearing the same type of thing. So I don't know if that like a, did the Ukrainian army procure a certain amount of those at some point, or are they a popular private purchase item? It's hard to say.
It's very hard to say. Yeah, totally.
Very, very difficult.
But the film does a good job with that. It's got guys with the tape, the fluorescent yellow tape on their chest rigs. The Separatists have got little white ribbons.
Yeah, which they're very common. They're black and orange.
Black and orange. Yeah, the Russian black and orange.
That's nice.
There's when they do the prisoner exchange, there's the Russian officer that they're talking to has I think it's the Russian naval ensign on his jacket. But it feels very authentic, and as you say, they've individualized each of the characters, so it feels like they've adapted and gathered their own kit, like as soldiers do. So it feels lived in.
Yeah, like there's a different array
of authenticity.
Like different chest rigs, different setups. Not everyone's not. They look like they've been there for a while, and that's another thing I was going to mention is that. I'm going to steal Matt's word, mise en scène, that he loves to use. But the mise en scène of this is really great because
it is. Agreed.
When Guide's taking you through the tour of the airport, where he goes, "Oh, this is the ballroom, this is our restaurant." It's basically all the same place, pretty much. But it looks really lived in. There's like discarded cans of food, there's bottles, there's a kettle on the main table. They've got this whiteboard, I think, which was probably at one stage maybe like a staff room for the airport staff.
Feels like it, yeah.
And it's got written like down like a little badge of like maybe what regiment is there, and then like who they're fighting against. I think it says like Azov at one point, and I'm thinking like, oh, who's this? And it's really interesting. I can't read Russian. Sorry, can't read Ukrainian, but it would be interesting to read that board. But I really love the lived in feel of it. It feels like a war zone that they're walking through. And it looks it as well. It's really nice. And everywhere's sandbagged and pigeonholed, and it looks like it could be a cracking airsoft site. I keep thinking when I was watching that.
I think the film does a really good job of making it look realistic, and there's a number of sequences where you get the impression that they're very close to the Russian and Separatist forces.
Yeah, and you're never sure really where they are. It's a really good thing the movie does.
Yeah, and from everything I've read about the battle, it seems that over the months where it was ongoing, they were struggling for control of terminal buildings, and in some cases, they controlled the top 2 floors or the middle 2 floors, and the Separatists either controlled the basement and the ground floor, and it moved and it went back and forth. Even right up to the very end of the battle, it was back and forth. And I think the film does a good job of getting that across.
It really does, especially in the claustrophobic fight scenes. And there aren't many of them inside the terminal, but the ones that it has, very claustrophobic. The sound design is very good. Every round going off is a cacophony of echoing, and it gives you that horrible realism that you want.
One thing I almost forgot was the one very interesting depiction of a thermal optic.
Oh yes,
where I think it's Misha grows out onto the airstrip, the actual runway, and he's trying to find a rifle from dead Russian.
That's it. Yeah, he doesn't have one, does he? Yeah,
exactly.
Major.
So the film begins with it's a platoon that's moving up to relieve the airport.
That's it.
And they get bombarded by artillery, and the BMP that they're in is damaged, and they all pile out and end up in a minivan.
Yeah.
And some of them don't have their rifles.
Yeah, because he says, "I forgot my AK," and the guy's like, "Don't go back out there for it. You're mad."
Mm-hmm.
Which is quite nice.
So there's a bit where he goes out to look for a weapon, and he's watched by someone with a thermal optic, which is pretty good. I like the inclusion of that.
It looked good.
It was an interesting inclusion. There's a couple of other things I'll talk about later on that I thought were really interesting inclusions, but in terms of kit, that was one that stood out.
There was also like a trope, almost like a trope where I've never seen someone set a trope up, then kill the trope off really quickly. So that sequence where the guy he's killed the separatist who was coming to who heard the phone go off in the crater.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the chap that went out that Matt mentioned, he's stuck in a crater, and there's a dead separatist, and he's got his phone, and obviously his family are trying to ring him. And it keeps going off, and he keeps
like a Nokia
ending the call.
3310 or something.
Yeah, it must. Yes, indestructible phone. So that he takes his AK-74 off him, but the phone goes off when the separatists are close. And he kills a separatist, and I hope this isn't your favourite scene, Matt, because I'm ruining it.
It's not. Carry on.
Good. So he dispatches the separatist. He rakes the van with some gunfire, and he catches the chap that's in the back seat. And as he's driving back, you get this one little shot, and it shows the guy in the back's not completely dead, and his hand falls to the side, and then it cuts back to the front seat. And instead of him driving and not noticing anything, the chap reaches back and grabs the AK-74 from the back seat, and he puts it in the front seat next to him. And I'm like, in any other film, they would have had another option of him having to kill that guy off in the car because he didn't take the gun off him. And I've never seen someone set up that, oh no, he's going to go for his gun and kill the hero, the main character. No, he takes the gun off him. And I was like, yes. I was like, thank God, like we've seen someone kill a trope.
That is a little piece of realism.
I like it.
He's taking him prisoner, and he's just making it safe.
Took the gun off him.
He gives that AKS-74U to Old, I think it is.
That's it. He does, yeah.
Call sign Old. But yeah, I like that scene. I like that scene also. We've strayed into favorite scenes a little bit, but this is my favorite, where he takes the the dead separatist's rifle, and he checks it.
That's
takes the
nice.
magazine out, pulls the bolt back, checks there's a round in the chamber, which is again a nice piece of realism.
Oh, you see lads hand racking mags as well, which was nice by hand.
Yes, yeah, loading.
Don't see that in many films.
There's a little bit where one of them is they meet up with another squad, and they're about to go in and clear a bit of the building, and the guy, he mentions Counter-Strike, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's a nice little reference.
And then he takes the guy's safety off and racks his rifle for him.
Yeah. He's like, oh, it's like do you play Counter-Strike? He's like, it's like a video game. You go one level, then you go to another level. It'll be fine. So, Matt, favourite scene this week?
There's a few that stand out to me. Also, shout out to the inclusion of a Wilhelm scream during the tank battle.
Right.
Before we talk about anything else, let's just throw that out there. Lovely little inclusion.
So what you mean, Trope Corner from last week is here to stay? Is that your new? Is that going to be your? I'll make you a jingle for that.
I don't know. Let us know, everyone. Did you like Trope? The Trope tally?
Let us know. Do you want to keep the Trope tally going? Because we'll include that. If you like that, we'll try and do that.
So for me, favorite scene, there was some of the scenes that stood out most for me were the sort of character development scenes where there was a bit more nuance going on than I would have expected from what could have been a very straightforward piece of propaganda, especially considering the Ukrainian government's involvement. And I liked one particular scene where I think it's Serpin who is talking to the guys about why they're fighting, and they have various different reasons. And he talks about think about who you're fighting. You know, it's not just Russians, but it's also Ukrainians, and that's a terrible thing. And we've got to learn to avoid making this happen again, which is, it's a constant with any conflict, isn't it?
And then you have like the
only way to avoid conflict is to learn.
Yeah, like even having counter arguments about, well, are they Ukrainian because they speak Russian and all things like that. And it's a very nuanced conversation. I was like, you can tell that the person who wrote it wrote theatre first. It was a very theatre-y type getting into it.
There was one line. There was one line I really liked. Of course, this is from subtitles. It might hit very differently in Ukrainian. And it says, you have to think, love, and feel the injustice. I like that line. And outside of that scene, there's a number of others that are thought-provoking. There's a bit where there's a dude that's suffering from trauma that one of his friends has been killed already in the war. And when, I think it's Misha, returns with that prisoner in the back of the van.
Yes.
Kills him outright. He shoots the prisoner.
That's it.
And again, that's not necessarily something you would include in a straight-up propaganda movie.
No.
It adds nuance. It shows that humans are capable of horrible things in horrible situations. There's a little bit on the roof where I think it's the doctor, the medic, and they're talking
Psycho.
about, yes, they're talking about perspective, and they're looking at a tree, and they cover like most of their eyes, just so there's a tiny slit through their hands, and they can see this tree and none of the war going on around them. That was a really nice scene as well. And then the only other scene like that stood out to me, there's probably more, but Serpin talks to a prisoner that a guide has beaten up. And
that's it. Yeah.
Treated rather badly because he has a bit of a breakdown. And they talk about the reasons for the war, and it's interesting how they touch on the USSR. And Serpin does the same in a conversation with Misha, where Misha sort of says, "This is all your generation's fault. You people that were born in the USSR." you've had 25 years since the USSR to, cultivate the Ukrainian state, the country. But you've let go to shit.
It's really
Corruption.
because it's still very hard to sort of grasp, like as a Westerner who's obviously born since 1990,
Oh, totally.
like how the end of the Cold War still really has fucked a lot of Europe up, really, like for want of a better word, term. But yeah, it's very interesting to hear that from a novice, because this is all new to me, like the whole social political part of it, and how people sort of want to have their nation. And that's one of the most, as you say, it's one of the most enjoyable parts of the movie, I think, because it adds really rich context to not just the actual movie, but my understanding of why the Donbas war happened and why this war is happening now. Which is why reason we chose it, really. But no, like it, I love all that part, and it's like when Major and August is my favorite scene. Is another scene that is a talking scene. When Major and August are discussing Gogol and the Cossacks and nationalism, like the whole like makeup of Ukraine, and he's saying, you nationalists, you're all you got your old head stuck in the old ways, basically accusing him of being a right winger. And he says, well, oh, you're a libtard. You want to wear embroidered shirts and march with flags, but you don't stand for anything. It's basically just accusing him of just being part of a crowd. And then we learn that Major's from a rich family, and if he wanted to, he could have fled and been part of like music contests representing Ukraine, and he could have fought for the country that way. But he actually wanted to fight because he actually did want to stand for something. And then I forget the other character, but he snaps back and he goes, "I read Stephen King." So like, what? It doesn't matter. Like he's sort
Stefan,
of like
isn't it?
Stefan. Yeah, he's like he just comes in and it's like a voice of reason when he's like, it doesn't matter what you are. Like if you're Ukraine, it's like a whole thing of like, I took it as, well, if you're Ukrainian in your heart, then you're surely Ukrainian. Like it was quite a very interesting sequence. You could feel like this could be on the stage. You could really turn this script into because it's only set in like 2 or 3 rooms. You could definitely have it as a stage play. But then jumping off of that to go into more sort of routine war movie territory, I thought the hand-to-hand sequence was done well. I thought it was really well choreographed.
I was going to say that too.
Oh yeah, no, and I think it's the first time we've seen an AK magazine or a magazine of any weapon used as a weapon. A guy gets beaten to death with it, which is quite.
Yeah.
You only get a few little hits, but I was like, oh, okay. It's a proper good hand-to-hand.
It's very visceral, and there's a lot of stabbing and beating, and a lot of point shooting and bursts, and then, as I mentioned, in the alley tally, someone draws a Stechkin APS.
Yeah, but he's almost not aiming it, is he? He's just sort of wildly firing it.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting. But and then they do. But then they do another thing, which we'll come back to the nuance of it, where in the first, I don't know how you felt about this, Matt, but in the first, I think it's the first engagement, you see these separatist troops come in, and they've got balaclavas over their heads, and they're wearing like green fatigues and big black body armor vests on. And I was like, oh, here we go. They're going to be like stormtroopers. They're not going to have any. The film's not going to say anything about them. They're just going to be there to be shot at. But then later in the film, you do see guys. They have lines. He has a conversation with, I think it's the prisoner exchange. He has a conversation with one of the officers, and it's quite a good conversation. He's not just saying you're a fucking separatist, I hate you, fuck off. He's like actually talking to him, and I thought that's good, because if the movie had gone another way, I'd have come out of it not knowing anything about the other side. And I know the film doesn't lean into it that heavily, but at least it didn't totally dismiss it. It was quite interesting how they approached it.
No, I agree. And as I said, that conversation between the POW and Serpin goes into a lot of the history. Well, from Serpin's point of view, anyway.
Yeah. Of
why the war is ongoing, and the separatist describes his country as the USSR, which I thought was really interesting.
That was interesting. Yeah.
That part struck me. But as you say, very well choreographed, really well shot, very competently made. and it conveys that chaos of hand to hand, and the fact that this fight was going on within a building the size of, you know, a small terminal in a regional airport. And it does convey it well. And then, you know, there's some exterior scenes where you see separatist forces charging, and the guys are on the, you know, the barricades. I also thought that the inclusion of a lot of the social media stuff was interesting.
That was good. Yeah, near the end.
The guys are on their phones. Major or Misha talks about leaving one last like on things. On social media.
Looking at Facebook, like unfriending someone.
Stefan gets wounded and takes a selfie, posts it, and when he's being tended to by Psycho, the doctor, the medic, and he says, "I've got 23,000 likes, and my wife's unblocked me," which I thought was great.
That's it, yeah.
And
I like the line where he goes, "Oh, if I send you this video, will you put music to it later and put it online?" Like when they're having their firefight. Yeah,
so topical.
I know.
The number of videos I've watched on Telegram and various other platforms where guys have just literally put, you know,
like Ukrainian, like
just
dubstep or rave music on there.
Really interesting music over combat videos. It's definitely a thing that's still ongoing. But I like that inclusion of social media. I thought that gave it a little bit of nuance. It won't date the film terribly, I don't think. In terms of like watching it in 30 years' time, people won't understand what that is.
Yeah.
It wasn't too much. It wasn't like some films you see where they have like text conversations pop up.
Oh no, yeah, it's not like
on the screen.
Sherlock where it comes on screen.
Oh, God, that is going to date heavily.
It will do, yeah.
But there's none of that.
Is it still weird for you to see smartphones in war movies anyway? Because usually we're not watching a war film about a war that's this close.
True. I mean, do you remember the first time you watched like Black Hawk Down and like one of the Somalian dudes pulls out a phone?
Yeah, that was weird.
It's weird, isn't it? Because
you don't think of it in a war zone, do you?
I think it's the same with like Three Kings. That always struck me.
Yeah.
Where Mark Wahlberg is on the phone to his wife.
It. Yeah.
When he's captured.
Because we watched 13 Hours of Benghazi the other day, didn't we, together? And there's the guys on the laptop, like video calling his family. Yeah. Like even in 2014 when that movie came out, that still seemed quite new to video call people.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? It's interesting.
It's really weird. Yeah.
It's there's a future special.
God, no. PEDs in war movies, Christ. Get all military term for you there. But no, I think maybe, like we do, we should just schmoozle into final thoughts.
I think so. I think for me, in terms of final thoughts, I think it was a good way of taking a look at some Ukrainian-made cinema about an ongoing conflict. Of course, when the film was made, the current invasion obviously hadn't begun. 4 years away at that point. But the conflict and operations in Donbas were still ongoing. You know, there was the line of contact still there, and there was still sporadic fighting on that border. So for Ukraine, still very much an ongoing war when the film came out.
Because some people say that the current invasion is just an ongoing thing about the Donbas, don't they?
Well, exactly, and there's people that say that, you know, it's the full scale invasion of Ukraine rather than just the conflict in Donbas and Crimea, which I can understand.
Same.
I've been wanting to do a film from Ukraine for a while, but it was finding a good option. We mentioned a couple before. And you ran through a load that sound quite promising. There's some in there that sound like they would be worth checking out.
Sniper looks interesting.
The one about the patrol boat, the minesweeper, would be really good to cover. That's been quite well regarded in the reviews I've read. And I mentioned at the very beginning of the film that the director is already working on and has finished at least one of them. 2 films which are going to have if not directly about the war, one of them is. Both of them are going to have that context of the ongoing invasion and war in Ukraine, which for us as a war movie podcast that likes to look at the context of when films were made, I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I would say this is a really competent film that punches above its weight. There's certain things that I think are lost in translation, and there's certain things in terms of filmmaking that don't perhaps work as well as they could have done. Some of the bits after the climax of the film where spoilers, Serpent is shot by a sniper, could have been handled a little bit more clearly, I think.
It's sort of it fizzles out for me.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And what the film does at the end is it shows another rotation of soldiers going into the airport.
Yeah. The credits are well done, where it's just guide taking them through again, like it's all going to happen again, which I did like.
And I think that reflects the reality of that battle.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I'll jump off from Matt. Like I like the sets. I like the sound design was decent. There were good set pieces. I would wish there were a few more of them, perhaps. But I understand with the budget, you can only do what you can afford. It's definitely a film to watch if you want an understanding about the Donbas War of 2014.
Well, at least the Ukrainian perspective.
It's Ukrainian perspective, yeah. And then jumping off from that, starts to make you think about the current war and how that's had an effect on it and things like that. I've come away just having a lot more understanding about, Ukrainian socio-political issues, which is interesting and important and poignant for now. But then my only gripe with the movie is that I do feel that I've not said it for a few weeks, but I do think it was a little bit long in places. It was a long 2 hours, I got to admit.
Yeah.
But then again, it is half term here at the Maguire household, and my little one is off, so I had to watch it in like 20-minute spurts, so it didn't really help.
No.
Luckily, it was. See, I can't watch these kind of movies when he's in the house because he's awake, because obviously there's swears, there's bangs, explosions. I don't really want him to see it, but because it was in Ukraine,
not always suitable.
Not always suitable, but because it was in Ukrainian with subtitles, I just stuck it on, and he was happy as Larry.
Well, that's all sounds great and everything, but we wait till he's like shouting "Suka" at you from the top of the stairs.
Dive under the sofa and grab my AK, ready to return some fire up the stairwell. But no, I feel like the movie fizzled out a little bit after that tiny little firefight they have at the end with the tank battle, and then their friend gets killed, and they play a trumpet like eulogy for him. And then they go back to the staging area, and then the new troops come in. And then I was like, oh, okay, it's building up to something. There's going to be this great valiant last stand heroic thing, or they're going to pull out and they're going to not win, but there'll be like a Pyrrhic victory or something. And then I was like, oh, the credits roll.
Yeah, and I think the reason it's like that is because that reflects the battle in that it was kind of it was obviously a Ukrainian defeat because it was tactical Ukrainian defeat because they retreated. Yeah. To the Pisky, the village nearby that's mentioned in the film.
Right.
Because the airport itself was not very defensible.
No, hard to defend.
A lot of open ground.
Yeah.
Obviously, the tower is super useful for artillery spotting.
And isn't it in the middle? It's in the middle of Donetsk as well. So it's not, they were like a little blip on the map, and everyone's around them, I guess.
Yeah, so it's understandable that the film wouldn't have a big climax like that because while there was fighting right up until the end.
As a Westerner watching Western war films, we're used to that big climactic ending.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And we've seen it with like Pamfilov's Men, where there's that big climax at the end.
Yeah.
So it's not just a Western thing; it's also in Eastern European cinema, Russian cinema. And I think just for the human psyche, that is
you just expect it, aren't you?
Yeah. But I think it does a fairly decent job of not ending it with a Pyrrhic victory, not ending it with a defeat. It just kind of gives you a snapshot of the center of that siege.
It doesn't,
and then takes you out of it.
I mean, having just said that one, I'm going to totally just contradict myself. But then I was also kind of pleased that it didn't it didn't leave me with any sort of opinion in a way. It was just like, right, look, these lads turn up now and they're still going to be able to fight, still going to fight this battle. It didn't go, you must hate the other side or you must side with us and our view. It did leave you quite open.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But yeah, it's I should have mentioned it earlier in the episode, but I watched it on an app called Plex, which was built into my smart TV, and that had the original Ukrainian audio with the subtitles. There's a dubbed version on YouTube, but the dub is bad because the actors they've got in.
The dub is always bad.
Dub is snub the dub, what we always say on this show.
Snub the dub hashtag.
Yeah, and I think you can rent it on Amazon or you can get the DVD quite cheaply. And we should have said that at the start. But
I believe Seteblyov's next film, Miani 21, is also going to be on Plex as well.
Okay, right.
Because when I was doing some research about what it was about, one of the pages that came up was a Plex page. And it said like out on the 22nd, which is probably when this will.
Yeah, if you've got Plex FOF fans, there's some quite eclectic little war films on there. There's a nice little selection if you're inclined. There's Gun Ho, which is like a really early Robert Mitchum film from 1943 or something. Yeah, check that out if you've got it. But yeah, I think we should maybe wrap up. So, I mean, that was Cyborgs, called Heroes Never Die over here. If you can watch it, please do. And if you can give to United 24, please do. But we obviously understand cost of living crisis at the moment in the UK. We understand if you can't. So a little bit of FOF news before we end the show. If you've listened this far and if you're keeping up to date on the social media account of the show, you'll know
at Fighting on Film on Twitter.
Fighting on Film on Twitter, of course.
We're also on Instagram and Facebook.
There you go. Everywhere. We're everywhere. You'll be aware that we are next month, March, we are doing Mercenary Month 2. It's coming back.
Mech Month 2, Mech Harder.
Mark Harder, yeah. So keep your eyes peeled on by the time this goes out, the movies for the month will probably have been revealed. But if you're still want to get involved in our Patreon vote of the last movie in the month, because there's 5 Wednesdays in March, so there's going to be 5
a bumper month
of Merc Month films to choose from on the Patreon. There's the Extraction with the guy that played Thor.
Liam Hemsworth.
Liam Hemsworth. Chris Hemsworth. That's it. Ronin from 1998 with Robert De Niro,
which is running away.
Yeah, it's absolutely storming ahead. There's 50-50, which is a 1992 film with Peter Weller and Robert Hayes. Men of War with Dolph Lundgren.
Just to explain that everyone, regardless of whether you're a Patreon member of the supporting cast, can vote on that this month. We've opened it up to everyone. So head over there, check it out, have a look at some of the perks. If you enjoyed the show, please do support it. We've got perk levels for everyone.
Yeah,
we very much appreciate all of the support that you give us and enable us to keep making the show.
Yeah, it is.
But we are very excited for Mech Month 2.
Yeah, we are, because it's a little bit out of our ballpark, because not all those movies are traditional war films. There's some kind of just actiony movies that if you enjoyed the episode about
tangential links.
Yeah, and if you liked episodes on like Where Eagles Dare and The Wild Geese, things like that, you'll love Merc Month. Commando, yeah, exactly. If you're that way inclined, Merc Month really hits the spot, and we enjoy doing it. It's just a bit of fun. Once again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week, everyone, when Merc Month 2 comes back with a vengeance.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.